Before going into the main video, I thought I'd make a quick summary of the parts and modifications you'll likely have to make if you intend on replacing the original 28mm carb with a new 34mm model. So getting straight into it, I had to replace the rubber inlet manifold that connects the engine to the carb. The original 28mm model is too small, so you'll need to order a new one of those. I also had to strip some of the outer sheathing off of the throttle cable, such that the throttle slide is lower down inside this carb. So by removing the outer sheathing, it actually gave me more internal cable length. So if you watch the video, you'll see an approximate amount that I had to do in order to make that fit. You'll also need some 1/4 inch fuel line. The original 28mm carb is approximately 5mm here for the connection. 1/4 inch is a lot bigger, so you will need to have a larger hose there. I think finally, oh no, not finally, I did have to replace the 2-stroke oil line. On the 34mm model, the connection that's down here, you can't see it, it's physically further away, so I needed to replace the entire secondary 2-stroke line. And now finally, the back of the carb on the 28mm model, so the air connection, if I put it that way, this air connection here is the same size as the 34mm model, so it should fit your original air box, so no need to modify that. So that's about all you'll need in order to install one of these carbs. Let's go on to the video. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me. This kit you're looking at came with the bike when I bought it about 1.5 years ago, and the parts have lived under the bench since then. I knew the carb was incomplete, so here I'm using an exploded diagram of the VHSB34LD Carb to accurately note the missing parts. Throughout this build, I placed all orders through Australian supplier Eurobrit, who I found very knowledgeable and provided great customer service. You may wish to contact Eurobrit if you plan on rebuilding a Dellorto carb. I'll provide their details in the link below. I'm conscious that this is a long video and there's probably detail that you don't need to see. So in the description below, I've itemized the stages so that you can skip to parts that you're only interested in. If you plan on watching the whole thing, I suggest you buckle up and grab some snacks and a Red Bull, because it gets pretty dry in places. So again, thanks for watching and hope you enjoy. So just to check the delivered parts, I've laid them out on the bench in an approximate order that they're shown on the drawing. So just starting here, we've got the brass tube. That's part number 16, goes in the bottom of the carb, part of the pilot assembly. Moving up to the top, we've got 11, 10, 9 and 8. And the throttle cap and the gasket that sits inside there, that's 12 and 7. I've got the world's longest throttle spring. I was given a couple of choices with this, soft and a hard. I went with the hard spring. Moving on to the needle and the C-clip. This is a standard needle for the carb that suits the 34mm. I'm just trying to keep it standard. And I've got the brass screw and a 40 throttle slide. I was given 3 or 4 different options for this, but I went with the 40 again, trying to keep the carb standard. So the needle goes in the slide down there and pull that through. And then the brass screw keeps the needle in place and also holds the throttle cable. So once that's screwed up, nothing can move. Moving up to the top here, I've got the 3 parts for the choke. You might notice that the choke is different to the original 28mm design. On the left hand side of the handlebars, it's usually cable operated. Now I'll need to physically reach into the left hand side of the engine and operate it kind of manually like that. I hope it's not too much of a problem, but see how we go. And then finally, just as a safety measure, I did order a secondary side of the throttle and cable splitter. Now I'm not sure if I am going to need this or whether the original setup for the 28mm carb will actually fit this style of carb. I don't know if they're different lengths of cable or what, but basically what this does is as you twist the throttle from the single cable, it then goes through this pulley system and concurrently operates the throttle slide and the oil pump. So that's just a safety measure of mine, just so I'm not waiting around. So now we can feel and we can hear that that has actually closed off the fuel lines, which is what we want. So according to the manual, Dellorto UK, from this line here, from this surface to the float line here, that should be 13 millimeters, that gap. So what we're going to do is use the digital caliper here. It's closed and set to 0. And what we want to do is just find out if we're on the money. Now, setting that to about 13, that's spot on. Just do up the top of the caliper so it doesn't move. And then using the back end of the caliper, we can see that we're pushing the float before reaching the 13 mil. So I'm guessing there that we're a couple of mil off of the 13 that's specified in the manual. So you have to realize that Dellorto designed this carb for a wide range of uses. Now, I think the 13 millimeter gap from here to here is a guide. According to the Aprilia forums, they suggest that 14 millimeters is better than the 13 millimeters. This is because how the carb sits on a slight angle on the engine manifold, it causes the float and the fuel to sit differently. It's not a level, it doesn't sit level in the engine. Let's find out exactly where we are with this setting, and we might need to change them accordingly. I'd much rather go with what has been tried and tested on the forums rather than what Dellorto are specifying. So I'm at about 15 now. So I'm not touching yet. And that's what they're set at. So the document that I'm working from online specifies that you should have the C-clip on the needle on the second notch. I'm actually using the third notch, so it will run slightly richer, which is okay while I'm testing. I only use that as a guide for these things. Obviously that's going to have to come back out in a minute. So guys, off camera, I have been doing a bit of work here, and I found that the throttle cable for the 34mm carb actually needs more cable to connect it to the slide. Now, I think that's a mixture of a lot of things where, you know, from the original cable entry to the 28mm carb is a lot shorter than the entry for the 34mm carb. I do have a packet of throttle assembly cable here, a complete assembly, and without opening it, actually measuring through the bag here, if you can see, I measured the amount of cable that was on this assembly as opposed to the original throttle assembly that I have already on the bike, and it was actually the same length as what I already had on the bike. So it's not my best work, but I decided to modify and cut the outer sheathing of the cable in order to gain more throttle cable out this end. So then, using my digital caliper here, I was able to figure out how much cable was at the bottom, and then knowing where the cable connects to the slide, you just drop the slide in so that it's right down in the bottom of the carb like that, and then you can measure the depth from here inside. That was then, I had to cut approximately about 38mm off of the outer sheathing, so I have more cable inside, and that was able then to connect to the carb. So I've just discovered that the old secondary oil hose that leads to the carburettor isn't long enough to suit the new 34mm carb. So what I'll need to do is remove the oil pump, disconnect the old secondary line, and then use a new piece of oil tube, 3mm internal diameter oil tube. I'm going to cut this to length first, just so it suits the new carb length, and track it through the bike. And then I'm going to remove the pump and then prime the oil through the new tube until it comes out the other end, plug it onto the new carb, and then probably prime it through into the carb. I'll show you how to do that next. So as you can see here, hopefully there are two lines on the oil pump, one on the arm and one on the pump itself. Those with the cable adjusted here, they're supposed to be lining up. Now, simplified in my mind, I'm just trying to justify this on camera, because I've gone from a 120 main jet in the standard carb and the 34mm has a larger size of a 160 jet. In my mind, that is more air and fuel is getting into the engine, so I think I may need a smidge more, a bit more oil. So what I'm going to do here is adjust the cable slightly, just so that the oil pump is a few mil off center, and hopefully by moving this out, I'm just going to have a slightly off-centered line here, and that would then supply a fraction more oil than before. Again, this is a bit of a trial and error for me. I've never done the 34mm carb upgrade, so if the mixture is a little rich when I'm doing plug chops, I can always come back and adjust this and line those up again, but I'm going on the side of caution, just keeping the mixture rich for now. So my first instinct to limit the fuel going into the engine here and solve the rich condition is to remove the original pilot jet, which is a CD1 model, and replace it with the B36, a different jet that I got from another supplier. Now you can see if you look through the middle of the CD1 jet that the hole is quite large, and that would let a lot of fuel through. The B36 is really quite small, so let's give that a try and see how we go. During this time I also readjusted the two-stroke pump delivery system, and this wasn't the cause for the very rich condition. Here we go again, back on the workbench. I did do a test with the new 36 pilot jet installed, and it didn't work. In fact, the bike ran so bad and rich, I thought it might damage the engine, so I had to stop the test quickly. It's almost like the choke jet is constantly in the on position. And I now know that this is not going to be an easy fix, and I'm beginning to think that the carb is just old and could be simply worn out. Pressing on, I placed a third order with Eurobrit part supplier for a range of smaller main jets. This carb originally came with main jets ranging from 160 up to 180. Here is my new range of smaller jets ranging from 158 down to 145. You'll see later that I remove the 160 and install a new 150 as a trial. Moving forward, I'll show you the range of diagnostic tests that I do on the carb. At this stage, the constant trial and error is driving me crazy, but I guess that's just carb tuning, right? So starting at the start with the testing, here I'm using low air pressure to test the main fuel delivery circuit to the float jet opening. There were no obvious air leaks and it tested okay. These are the small floats that regulate the fuel level within the carb bowl. By submerging them, I can check that there is no water ingress and that they remain buoyant. If they are faulty, one or both of the plastic balls will sink as they fill with water. Defective floats can lead to excessively high levels of fuel in the carb bowl and cause flooding of the system. After 5 minutes of bouncing around, I can confirm that my floats are fine. With the float circuit cleaned for a third time, it's now back in the carb. With a small amount of air, I'm checking that the rubber tip on the float needle covers the whole of the float jet. It seems to be working fine. Here I'm checking that the choke jet circuit is tight by blowing a small amount of air down through the choke hole and testing the new parts as they open and close. If I find this is leaking, I will have excessive fuel leaking into the engine. Fortunately this time, it tests okay. I'm using a screwdriver to suspend the carb in the glass jug and hold the carb at a consistent angle that is similar when connected to the engine. The portable fuel tank I'm using here can deliver petrol quicker than the normal motorbike tank, so I'm using the red valve to regulate the pressure and deliver a similar flow rate as the normal bike tank would deliver. I was actually hoping that the floats and float needle would have stopped the fuel way before this point. Remembering that the float jet and float needle are some of the original parts that came with the carb, I have inspected and cleaned these parts thoroughly, however they appear to be faulty. This is the original 28mm carb that I took off the bike. I do know that it works, I've never had a problem with it, so I'm experimenting here to test a theory in my madness. And there we go. The floats rose with the fuel level and stopped the fuel way below the base of the carb. This feels like it's my 50th attempt at this. Here I've dropped the float height from a recommended 14mm down to 17mm, in the hope that the fuel level will drop with the increased float height. In denial that the float needle and float valve is faulty, I try cleaning them with an earbud and metal polish. Now the float valve is completely cleaned and polished. It's only whilst I'm editing this video on the big screen that I can see there are a series of small little pits or dents inside of the valve seat. This must have been the problem. There's already a lot in this video, so I'll save the final tuning for another dedicated video. You may remember around the 23-minute mark that I was going to test the bike using the temporary throttle connection. Well, in this final section of the video, I'll show you how I tidy and make the existing throttle cable fit properly.